Hello, I am Yashas Kumar. So I'm a part of the ECDE Foundation, where we believe every child deserves an education. And in this video, we're going to be moving on to the next unit. The last three videos we've been on the first unit and just discussed the basics of economics, in particular microeconomics. And now we're, gonna dive into the topic and get to know it better. And we're gonna start off by talking about elasticity. But firstly, a few of the key ideas that are going to be a part of this unit and possibly a part of the next 3 to 4 videos are price elasticity of demand, income elasticity, cross price elasticity of supply, the impact of taxes and subsidies, the impact of price controls, tariffs and quotas, and utility maximization. So this is what we're going to be covering over the next 3 to 4 videos, and let's dive right in. So before we go and I explain this stuff to you, what do you think is elasticity, and what role do you think it plays in decision making or in economics in general? Over the course of the video, I think this is something you should think about the whole time and try to answer by the end of the video. I will give you the definition of elasticity, and I think the role part of the elasticity is something for you to try to find out, and something for you to try to grasp as I talk about elasticity in this unit over the next 2 videos. All right, so let's dive into elasticity. So do not worry about the equations. These are examples that I will be going over in just a second. But firstly, studying the economic concept of elasticity is much like a corporate executive workshop, the topic of which is sensitivity training. When we observe a consumer's purchase decision, say for good X, change in response to a change in external variable, the price of good X or her income, elasticity helps us measure the sensitivity of her consumption to that external change. So we're gonna now go over the price elasticity of demand. I mentioned this as a part of the key ideas, and so let's go over it real quick. So the law of demand tells us that all else equal, when the price of a particular good falls, the quantity demanded for that good rises. If you recall, over the last unit, I went over the law of demand, and if you check out my last video, you will see a review where I went over the law of demand specifically. So, but the law of demand fails to answer for us by how much. Will it be a relatively large increase in quantity demanded, or will it be negligible? In other words, we would like to measure how sensitive consumers are to change in the price of this good. Now, what is the definition for elasticity or price elasticity of demand? So the definition is ED, E subscript D, like you see on the screen, is a percent in quantity demanded of a good X divided by the percent in the price of good X. So these equations are some examples, which I will be going over in just a second. But here's something to note. The law of demand ensures that E subscript D is negative but for ease of interpretation, economists usually ignore the fact that price elasticity of demand is negative and simply use the absolute value. The greater this ratio, the more sensitive or responsive customers are to change in the good of price X. Okay, now range of price price elasticity. Economists like to classify things. It's a sickness, but it's usually done for a reason. For example, we classify price elasticity based upon sizable how sizable the reaction of consumers is to change in the price. Rather than describing consumers as really responsive or really responsive or super duper responsive, we classify consumers as elastic or inelastic. Now, here are some examples. Take a look at the first equation. The price of a laptop computer increases by 10%, and we observe a 20% decrease in the quantity demanded. So use the formula I gave you just now and plug it in, and you'll get that. So we said we observe a 20% decrease. So that's why there's a negative 20 divided by increase of 10% plus 10. So which will give you negative 2. I told you about taking the absolute value, which is 2. So if E subscript D is greater than 1, the demand is said to be price elastic for good X. The responsiveness of the consumer exceeded in percentage terms the initial change in price. Here's another example. The price of a package of chewing gum increases by 10%, and we observe a 5% decrease in the quantity demanded. Using the formula above, find out. Now, same thing. ED, first is a 5% decrease divided by a 10% increase, which will give us exactly half. Notice how I did not put the negative because we're taking the absolute value, so it's completely unnecessary. So if ED is less than 1, demand is said to be price inelastic for good X. The initial change in price exceeded in percentage term the responsiveness of the consumer. Okay. Next example. The price of oranges increases by 5% and the quantity demand decreases by 5%. Using our elasticity formula, find this out. So it's basically 5% divided by 5%, decrease divided by increase. All right. So if ED is equal to exactly 1, demand is said to be unit elastic for good X. The initial change in the price is exactly equal to the responsiveness of the consumer in percentage terms. Okay, so that's basically what I'd say an intro to elasticity. Now we're going to go over the determinants of elasticity. Perfectly elastic and perfectly inelastic demand curves are usually reserved for hypothetical example, but they illustrate that E subscript D differs across consumer goods. Your intuition is that consumers respond to a price change in different ways. A 10% increase in the price of a car might have a drastically different consumer response from what we observe from a 10% increase in the price of a college education, a package of mechanical pencils, or hotel stay in Fort Lauderdale or Bellagio. Let's look at some general explanation for why elasticity differs. Number 1 is the number of good substitutions. So take this in account. The more narrowly the product is defined, the more elastic it becomes. If we narrow our focus from orange juice down to one brand of orange juice, the number of substitute grows, and we predict that so too does the price elasticity of demand for Minute Maid brand orange juice likewise. The demand for a blue Chevy SUVs is more elastic than the demand for Chevrolet SUVs, which in turn is more elastic than the demand for all SUVs. Okay. The next, another determinant is the proportion of income. So suppose a young full-time college student is purchasing her education by the credit hour and supporting herself with a part-time job on the weekends and evenings. Since the student is living on a relatively small monthly income, if the price of a credit hour increases, the response might be very elastic. The student might drop down to part-time status or drop out of college altogether so she can save enough money to return next quarter. And one of the most important determinants of elasticity is time. So suppose if the price of gasoline rises, consumers driving large SUVs do not immediately switch to small cars, and the e-subsidy is low for gasoline. But given enough time, if the gas price remains high, the ED of gasoline increases. So this is a pretty in-depth introduction to elasticity. I think this covers a lot of what's going to be on the exam, and it's important because elasticity is going to be something that comes up over this course a lot, and it's really important to know. So next video, I think we'll be going over total revenue and elasticity, cross price elasticity of demand, and microeconomic policy and application of elasticity. Stay tuned for that, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.